Before we get into case interviews, it's very imperative that you guys understand why does case interview exist in the first place. So Bhaskar set a very fantastic precedent by teaching you what is consulting, specifically what is public policy consulting. You usually spend around 6 months to 1 year to many times 3 years solving a case, which takes around breaking down a problem, how do you communicate to clients, and what Mckinsey to start with came up with this concept of case interviews. They're trying you to emulate the entire skill set that a consultant showcases during 3 years. They want you to showcase it in 45 minutes. So it's a different ball game altogether. What is important? There are 3 learning goals for the next 2 hours that I will be focusing on. Listening and identifying cues to get to the root cause. We will be doing session where I will be playing interviewer as well as I will be playing the role of an interviewee so that you can get to know about the 2 roles. It is very, very important that you listen to your interviewer when you are solving a case. Because if you're not listening to the cues, then you might be just solving the case altogether in your mind, but not listening, but not taking the cue of the interviewer. Why it is important? Because when you're actually doing an engagement of consulting, there are areas or there are places where the client would give you an information. So this is something that Bhaskar also mentioned. You go to the client, you give him 3 recommendations, but the client would tell you, hold on, I have few feedback for you. These 3 things are not supposed to be done, or we can't do this. If you're not listening to your client, and if you go back again after 1 month and you give those 3 recommendations, then you're screwed basically. You're just showcasing a skill set that you lack listening ability or you lack comprehensibility about the information. That's exactly what the interviewer will test you on. It will be an interactive case interview, so they will be checking if you are listening and comprehending real time that information he just passed you on. And we will talk more about it. Thinking as broadly as you can. So Bhaskar asked you a question about digital investments in New Zealand, right? All of you came up with very, very different viewpoints. You said about well-being, somebody talked about economics, somebody talked about cybersecurity. That's the width of knowledge that you're talking about. When he drew that graph of 8 parameters, that's actually the role of the consultant is supposed to go deep into a parameter, but also zoom out and think holistically. Think what are the other parameters that can influence your decision making. And that's why consultants are much more, when they start their job, they're much more generalists. So there will be people, I'm sure, in this room who have done law before. You will be fantastic at those 1 of the 8 parameters which we'll talk about legal. But guess what? You need to also think about tech. You also need to think about economics. You also need to think about politics. That's what the role of a consultant is. He or she thinks very holistically because the client is just so busy doing their regular day-to-day job that they miss out on new parameters. So for example, if I am a special secretary in one of the ministries, I'm solving a tech problem, it's very unlikely that I will step myself outside of my role and I will think about politics. Or like Bhaskar mentioned, when you're trying to solve tech problem, you miss out on the fact that tech is just a means towards an aim. You need to question what the aim is. So thinking broadly will be very important and communicating structurally. I cannot emphasize enough on this point how important communicating structurally is. And it's very important that you also understand why communicating structurally is important. Look at this slide. There are 3 structured points that I asked you to focus on. Had I written a paragraph, you would have missed out on the central idea, right? And that's the problem with clients. They do not think very clearly. They're so much engrossed with their regular day-to-day job that they miss out on structured point. So for example, if you're in an elevator with a CEO and he or she asks you, okay, Shatakshi, what's the update on the project? If I tell him, oh, I did this analysis, there were so many data points, I'm trying to do this, we are trying to do that, he might not be impressed. Versus if you tell him, there are 3 updates. Number 1, we found this. Number 2, this is what we're doing. Number 3, this is our next step. He'll be blown away. You just gave him the crux of the entire information that you've been analyzing. Again, that's the beauty of consulting. You can deep down, and the moment comes, you can give a bigger picture to the client as well. So I want you to really focus on these 3 skill sets because the end objective of this session is that you should be able to pick all these 3 skill sets after the session. Again, trying to emphasize identifying root cause of the problem. So when I throw a problem at you, which is soon going to come, you should be able to. So usually people think that consultants are problem solvers. 70% of your bandwidth goes in identifying the right problem. The client usually tells you the symptom of the problem, not the root cause of the problem. People usually think that I have to, so for example, if you talk about the New Zealand attack, you might think that I have to solve that these attacks or those attacks should not take place in future. That's just the symptom of the problem. But the leadership in the New Zealand actually got to the root cause of the problem. They were questioning how did the culprit get those arms in the first place. That's actually the root cause of the problem. Consultants spend 70% of their time finding the root cause of the problem. Then they move to solving the problem. It's very important that you're solving the cause of the problem, not the symptom of the problem. Solving problems, thinking cross-functionally, especially if you have measured in a role, make sure that you step out of that role and you think along other line of thoughts as well. I will help you think along those line of thoughts structurally and communicating structurally. One thing that I faced concern with my own self and with my clients that I coach, people think that if they don't know economics, they will suck at case interviews. That's not true. And I'm myself not an economics major. I studied chemistry, and if I could do that, I'm sure anyone can do that. All you need is just common sense, ability to break down a problem. Economics helps. I'm not saying that it will not help, but is it a disadvantage? Absolutely not. All you need to do is just think broadly, break down a problem, and let's have a structure to it.